All right, so as you can tell by the title, today's going to be my first tier list. I'm not a huge fan of tier lists because I think you have to pick and choose who your target audience is. As you guys know, if you've been following the channel for a while, I don't like to water down my advice just to fit more people and have it resonate with more people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because I could give out a watered down message that kind of helps everybody a little bit, or I could put out a great message that helps maybe half the viewers a ton and it really resonates with them. So that's my goal with this channel. That's my goal with this video in particular as well. So my choice for this video is hypertrophy programming, and more specifically, the demographic I'm going to be targeting is myself. This is how I program for myself, not for someone else, not for someone in the comments, not for a pro bodybuilder, not for beginner, literally just myself. And it's up to you to assess if this stuff does resonate with you and if it's stuff you want to try. So yeah, tier lists, they're never going to be definitive. They're never going to be perfect. They're far from it, but they're fun, but they're entertaining. And it gives you guys a good opportunity to look into my mind when it comes to programming for myself. I have a bunch of variables here, so I can't cover everything in depth, but you'll at least get the tip of the iceberg on how I view each one of these. So the first tier that I have, I'm sorry if you guys can't read that. I know it's kind of zoomed out. This is going to be the Instagram fake natty tier. There's a reason this one's at the bottom. The first variable with this is going to be periodization, particularly between goals, not necessarily between choosing muscle groups to prioritize. I would argue that predetermined periodization, even with certain muscle groups, isn't the best way to go about it, but that's for another video. This is going to be periodization between goals. So like hypertrophy phase and a strength phase or a strength block or whatever. I'm highly against this because anytime you take off of hypertrophy training is time that you have to make up in the future. That obviously goes without saying. So I'm not a huge fan of this. I think if you're looking to build muscle, it's such a slow and tedious process that you have to kind of dedicate 24/7, 365 to the muscle building process. Anybody that's serious about it understands this. And for myself, I would never just train for strength for the sake of it. It doesn't make much sense. Bodybuilding's always my goal. It always will be and always has been. So periodization. I got lovely handwriting, eh? Next one I've got is predetermined progression schemes. So I don't know why I said it like that. Progression. Yeah. Predetermined progression schemes. A little bit of a tongue twister for me. When it comes to this, I like having a set progression on how you're going to go about things, but having it predetermined at a schedule isn't the way to go, in my opinion, for hypertrophy, because that starts to mess with your proximity to failure, which should be the priority, and your progression will follow what that is and what your actual progression is on that lift. So for myself, I hate predetermining what I'm supposed to do. I hate picking a certain rep count or a certain weight or a certain amount of volume beforehand because I don't know where I'm going to be in the future. Auto-regulation, double progression, rep goal system, things like this and methods like this have always given me the best results. So I do have to put this in the Instagram fake natty tier. So I'll just write progression schemes. And yeah, if you're watching this, you definitely have to listen. There's no way you guys can read that. Next one in the Instagram fake natty tier list, 1 rep maxes. This is a complete waste of time for hypertrophy. There's virtually no benefits when it comes to muscle building. It's not that they don't build any muscle whatsoever, but there's much better ways to go about it. This one's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to waste all of our time talking about that. Last one here is going to be proactive deloads. This doesn't make much sense because accumulation of volume and progressing within that is going to be key for hypertrophy. I've never deloaded and just chosen when to deload. Even when I was kind of in that weird power building phase, I still didn't do it then. I just didn't feel the need to. And I was like, even though I'm trying to build muscle, why would I just take this time off? Reactive deloads are a different story, and I am saving that for later in the list. But pre-selecting when you're going to take a week off of your training, or even just even like half weight or half reps, which is basically a week off for hypertrophy. Not my cup of tea. I don't see a point in that. So for that, I have to put it down here. Terrible handwriting. My bad, everybody. Up next, second to last tier is going to be the nihilistic Reddit lifter tier. Pretty self-explanatory. The first one I've got for this is the pump. So the pump doesn't do a whole ton for hypertrophy as far as we know. In my experience, I haven't gained much from the pump. I think it's a good indicator. I think it's a fun side effect, but I don't think it will actually stimulate much growth. I do think the more experience I have and the more we learn as a community, it comes down to tension, proximity to failure, things like this. So for the pump, I think there could be benefits, and that's why I don't want to put it in the bottom tier. But it's definitely something that I have thought about with programming. And by the way, every one of these variables, these are things that I have thought about with programming before. This isn't encompassing every potential variable out there. These are just the things that I do give some type of thought to, whether I actually use it or not. These are all things that have crossed my mind. So the pump could be potential benefits. It's also fun. I do enjoy the pump, but not at the expense of more important variables. So it's one of those things where if I can get it and it's not in the way of anything else, I'll go for it. And I think it's fine. So that's why it's not in the bottom tier. Next up is going to be warm-ups. So for warm-ups, this is purely for convenience. I think that's the reason why it's not in the bottom tier. Structuring your split, warm-ups should be kind of around that. And when I say that, I'm referencing muscle groups that fit well together. So you take something like some type of chest press and some type of squat variation. That wouldn't work well on the same day. Not that you couldn't do it, but it takes up a ton of time because you're doing that many more warm-up sets. And there are lifts that you're going to be going heavy on too, so you have to do that many more warm-up sets and be that much more careful around those joints. So warm-ups, outside of that, they're not that important. I don't program warm-ups for myself at all. I just warm up with lighter weight until I feel ready to go. So warm-ups not really important. And then last one for the nihilistic Reddit lifter tier is going to be strength work. So strength work, in my mind, I would probably just call it accessory work, as ironic as that is. I don't think there's zero benefits to it, but I think the benefits of doing like strength type work and dabbling in those very low rep ranges, like 1 to 3, maybe 4, there's not much use to it. I think the only benefit would be if I had been lazy in the past and just needed to get myself kind of uncomfortable with that weight to get myself back into gear. That isn't something I've really ever had to do, but that could be a slight benefit. Other than that, I see no benefit whatsoever in doing a single, double, triple. 4 reps maybe with certain lifts like deadlift and squats, but outside of that, I don't see much of a point in strength work, and I do think it's actually counterproductive because the energy and the time that it takes up and takes away from more productive things you could be doing. Next up, we got the 2016 Power Building Supremacy tier. This is kind of what I was introduced to lifting, so that one hits home. That whole year and everything, that whole phase of YouTube fitness and whatnot kind of messed me up, so... that's why it's not the worst thing. It's not as bad as the 2 tiers beneath it, but it's not good. This is separated in half. This is like the worst it gets, kind of bad, pretty bad, but not horrible, pretty good, great, and then perfect. So first one I've got for this is going to be tempo. Tempo is one of those things where there's a wide variety of tempos that all work the same, and it's very difficult to actually not be within a productive tempo. It doesn't happen that often. For myself, I don't like track or pre-program or pre-select what tempo I'm doing. I don't know what my tempos are or the cadence of any lift that I do, but I do know that what I do is consistent and it does work, and it's kind of an instinctual thing once you get pretty good at training. So tempo, one of those things where there's not a whole ton of value in it. It's more so just if your tempo is really fast or really slow, it's probably not good. So Next one up for this, the 2016 Power Building, is going to be intra-workout structure. And what this means is just how you set your workout up. So this is supersets, giant sets, and exercise order within a given session. The reason why I don't have this higher is because it's not necessary. It's just convenience. And for myself, I could go through just straight sets on my entire workout. It would probably take 1.5 times as long to do that. It's not the end of the world for me, but the convenience is super helpful in keeping your mindset in the right spot, because I find that when I take longer rests, I'm pretty sure I have like really severe ADHD, so it helps me stay on track, but it isn't necessary. I have had really good training phases in years and seasons where I am just doing straight sets the whole time, like when I was younger and just kind of worked part-time or whatever. It was when I was in high school, and I was just doing straight sets, not really supersetting much, and it worked fine. So obviously now I'm a little busier, I'm an adult, and convenience is going to be important, but it's not required for me to actually make good gains. Last one I got for the 2016 tier is going to be the weighted stretch. I can't even read that. I legit cannot read that. I'm so sorry. That's awful. So the weighted stretch, this is kind of a funny one because I don't think it's necessary. I think there are potential benefits to it, and it's kind of the same with the intra-workout structure. It's like, obviously it's a very different thing. It's apples and oranges, but there are potential benefits to the weighted stretch. I think there are more things that I'm going to touch on in a higher tier here that's related to the weighted stretch that are going to be more important than the actual weighted stretch itself. I do think there are potential benefits, but I have grown a lot of muscles fine without overly emphasizing the weighted stretch, just emphasizing certain positions and certain ranges of motion over others and setting myself up to train and have a lot of tension in those particular zones. So the weighted stretch itself, isolated, I think it's important. And this is one that's kind of fringe in the middle. So I do think it's helpful. I do think it's important, and I do include it 100% in my training. But it's not everywhere. It's not on every muscle group, and it's not the highest of priorities. So now we're getting into the higher territory here. So this next one's going to be the OG YouTube fitness tier. Really good at the basics, fun time, kept it simple, nothing revolutionary, nothing that's going to be of incredible help to you or really innovating your training methods, but it's solid and it's fun. So OG YouTube fitness, that's the next one. The first one I've got for this is going to be rest times. So rest times, this is kind of a funny one because it's almost similar to tempo. So unless it's really short or it's really long, someone's probably going to clip that. You're probably fine. So this also kind of relates to the intra-workout structure too, because if you're supersetting a giant setting, rest times aren't that big of a deal, because by the time you do your first set of a giant set, rest 30 seconds, do your next set, and then do your third lift after that, it's already been enough time to where that muscle's fully recovered. You just have to make sure you're cardiovascularly recovered to do that next set. So rest times, they're important, but they're not crucial. But with that being said, you can severely shortchange yourself if your rest times are way too short, or even way too long for that matter, just for a psychological sake. Up next in this tier, this is one that almost made it to the one higher, but not quite. It's going to be rep ranges. I can't read that one either. I apologize yet again. So rep ranges, this is another thing where you can optimize what rep range that you're working in, but it's never going to be substantial and significant. It might be substantial, but a significant change from one rep range to the other probably isn't going to happen. It is worth it and it is important, but it's not something that's crucial. It's not something that's key. You can get great results training in sets of 6, 7, 8. Same with 13, 14, 15. They will be similar, and for certain lifts, kind of here and there, you might want to bias one rep range over another. But as long as you're kind of within that general like 6 or 8 to 15 to 20 range, you should be fine. Most lifts I do about 8 to 15 on. So for me, Rep ranges, it's more of a personal preference thing than it is a crucial piece of programming. But I do think it's important, and I do think you can be shortchanging yourself if you're not in a comfortable rep range for that lift. Like if I was to go 4, 5, maybe even 6 reps on a plat squat, I don't think I'd be getting that much out of that lift. It's a quick fix though, so it's nothing you have to program that seriously or think about that seriously when you're programming. So next one that I've got here is going to be advanced techniques or intensity techniques. This one can be very important. It's not necessary. And again, this is kind of that weird tier where it's like all these things like could be really important, they could be very helpful, but they're not quite there. So advanced techniques, I do actually use them pretty consistently, especially on certain isolation lifts, like my tricep training, particularly on cables. I love doing partials after failure. Even a little weighted stretch at the end is always great. So for stuff like this, I do like to incorporate some advanced techniques in there, some intensity techniques. I don't think it's quite going to make or break my gains, but I do think it could get me that extra 10, 20% on certain lifts. So yeah, like I said, tricep training, when I'm consistently training delts, it's also important, like on side raises, face pulls, that kind of stuff, going past failure. Isolation lifts like this, it has helped me a lot in the past. I'm not doing a whole ton of it right now, but it has given me a lot of gains. So I do think it's important to program that kind of stuff. Next one I've got here, organization of your volume. So this is going to be your split, how you split each muscle group up and how you spread your volume out throughout the week. Your split, it's another one of those things where it's important primarily for convenience and recovery. So stuff like this is getting to be pretty important. There are also mental benefits and psychological benefits to how you set your split up. There's certain things like a full body where I'm convinced that even though like physically on paper a full body program could work, I don't think I would have made as good of gains as I have if I was to actually run a full body split. Psychologically, it's hard for me to prioritize every muscle in one given day. I like to know what I'm training that day and get pumped up to train those muscles. Psychologically, it's helpful. And when it comes to the physical, the muscles that I train towards the end of the workout aren't going to get hit quite as hard. So let's say I do have a muscle that's a bit of a lower priority. That's probably going to go towards the end of a full body session. So when I've already trained my entire body and it's a muscle I don't care about quite as much, that's where it starts to become an issue. Because even though it's a muscle that isn't at the top of my priority list, it's still something that I want to grow. So it makes sense to put that on its own day, if that makes sense. So let's say something like calves. If I was to put calves at the very end of a full body session, I probably wouldn't get that much out of that. I'd probably skip it. When I have calves earlier on a lower body day, even if it's at the end of a lower body day, it's still after less than half the amount of work as a full body day. I'm much more likely to train them and train them hard. And I'm more psychologically in tune because I only have, say, 2, 3, maybe 4 muscles to actually target that day. So psychologically and even physically, I think it's important. Next one here is going to be diversifying muscle priorities. So I'm just going to put diversification. I can't read that either. Yeah, my handwriting's just getting worse as this goes on. So diversifying muscle priorities. This is just choosing where to allocate your volume. So for myself, knowing which muscles I'm going to prioritize and which muscles I'm going to put on the back burner, it is pretty important because if I'm not aware of that, like I might be putting too much volume into a muscle that I don't care about. So one, it might be half-assed kind of junk volume that's taking up time and energy when I could be using that more efficient to actually specialize in a prioritized muscle group. So for myself, just the self-awareness of the programming, it is going to be pretty important for me. Last one I have here, to finish off a point that I touched on earlier, this is going to be reactive deloads. So this can be something like an actual deload, which is very rare, or just a week off. So if something comes up, let's say it's holidays or vacation or whatnot, once or twice a year, I will take time off. And I don't like schedule that out. But if I plan a week vacation a month or two in advance, yeah, I mean, it's like at that point it's scheduled, but it's not like I'm setting up my program for the year and I'm like, all right, every 6 weeks I'm going to take a deload. They're kind of these one-off things. If I was to ever have like a nagging pain or injury, which I don't really get, and I will have a future video on that, that's when I would take a reactive deload. And that's it for the OG YouTube fitness tier. Up next, this one's controversial. So this is the basement bodybuilding tier. I feel like it should have been at the top because it's my channel, but at the same time, I think the Noble Natties is more fitting because it's not just myself in this community. There's a lot more lifters that I've learned from that you guys have learned from. So I do have to put the Noble Natties at that top tier. So for the basement tier, the first one that I've got here is tension curves. Tension curves are important when it comes to programming, and it's something that I'm thinking about quite a bit. You have to make sure that you understand the tension curve of that lift, and that helps you a ton with exercise selection. I got that machine row. Yeah, I know you can't see it, but it's back here. I got that on purpose because, or not, well, obviously I got it on purpose, but I purposely got that model because the way that the machine is engineered allows me to bypass certain tension curve limitations and certain strength curve limitations that are just built into my body. So in any row or pull that I do, super easy at the bottom and it gets very difficult at the top, to where I have to pick my battles in terms of what portion of that lift I'm actually being challenged in. So it can be something where, yeah, I can really challenge myself in that lengthened position, but I don't get any contraction whatsoever, which is probably still going to get me growth, but it probably won't be perfect. So for me, understanding my tension curves, something like that machine row where it skews to match my strength curve naturally, something like that is going to be important. And I know this is just one example. I can't dive into all of them in this video, but understanding your own tension curves, where your strengths and weaknesses are within a given lift, within a given range of motion within that lift, is pretty important. I think it's not the most important thing, but it's pretty high up there. And to be honest, most of the lifts that I pick, that's in mind when I'm picking those lifts. The next one that I've got here, kind of a similar topic, is going to be muscle lengths. So, the hell? There we go. My bad. So, with muscle lengths, we're starting to learn that challenging your muscle in the lengthened position is going to be a little bit more helpful. And this is something that I've changed my mind on over time as I've learned this, one, just from the consensus in the community, the science, and most importantly, my own experience. When you train a muscle where most tension is placed at the lengthened position, so take a preacher curl, for example. I used to hate preacher curls because there's no contraction. And then I realized that the way that these things are set up is you're on a 45-degree angle, and as you're curling, you're most against gravity here, where your biceps in the lengthened position. So you take something like a spider curl, where you're against gravity like this, and there's most tension at the top. One thing I've learned is that the spider curl, even though I feel it much more, it never got me that much growth. And that's not to say that spider curl is worthless, because it does allow you to get some high quality volume with very little recovery to be worried about. Something like a preacher curl, where you're training that muscle in the lengthened position, is key. Same thing with like a heel elevated plat squat, where your quads are legit under the most tension in that stretched lengthened position. Stuff like that, it's potent for growth. It really is very stimulative. So when I think about exercise selection, when I'm deciding what lifts I'm going to do, this is pretty high up there. It really is important when it comes to hypertrophy. Stuff like this is key. Next one I've got here, a little bit more general, but still in the same kind of category. This is just going to be exercise selection. So exercise selection, very important. You can make gains off a lot of different lifts. So your lifts don't have to be perfect, but they should be as perfect as they can be. Seriously, like I'm not someone to say, all right, we have to do this perfect 32-degree iliac pull down to target the lower lats at the optimal angle. That's a little bit too far to where you're too zoomed in on one variable. But at the same time, certain little changes make a big difference. For myself, when I was low bar squatting, I basically made no quad gains whatsoever because of this little change, which is where I put the bar and what my stance is and the elevation of my foot. When I switched to a plat squat, even though I'm using less than half the amount of weight I was using with the low bar squat, my range of motion is better, the strength curve is better, my recovery is better, much better, and my quads are getting bigger. So exercise selection, it's pretty important. Could I still make good gains off a low bar squat? Probably, but it literally makes no sense for me to pick that lift because I got worse gains off of it. It's that simple. And the last one I've got here is just going to be optimizing leverages. So a little bit more specific with the exercise selection. And yeah, the plat squat's the perfect example of this. I'm not built to squat. I have super long limbs. Like, it's just kind of the way I'm built. My arms are crazy long. I have like massive hands, super long fingers. Like, I'm just long limbed. I have long legs. I have a short, kind of stocky torso. So for presses, squats, this kind of stuff, I'm just not built for it. So for me, this might be a little bit more important than for most people. But I don't think I'm some freak. Like, I don't think I'm just the longest limbed person out there. I know a lot of us like to think that we're this special person. I don't think I'm anything special, but I definitely think I'm kind of skewed on the side of I don't have the best leverages. So being able to overcome this and optimize my leverages does allow me to make good gains. And this is kind of a variable that, or a foundational principle that my channel's built off of, because when I was using these lifts, like a wide grip bench, sumo deadlift, low bar squat, I kept getting strong, like very, very strong. And I had a big total and I was putting up big numbers, not just in a one or a max, but for reps too. And I never really got big from doing it. And I think it's because of leverages. It's because of the muscle length that I'm training at. So everything in this basement bodybuilding tier, this is stuff that's probably more individual to me, but I'm not an anomaly. I'm not the only person that's just built a little bit. I can't say built differently. I guess my structure is a little bit different, so I have to understand and adapt to that a little bit more. So technically built differently, not in the sense that you guys are probably thinking, but this stuff's important. It's allowed me to actually make really good gains. And it's not quite that like most important noble natty tier, but it's pretty damn close to it. So that's all I've got for the basement tier. Up next, the noble natty tier, the final one that I've got. The first one is going to be technique. And these are in no particular order, by the way. So technique is what gives you the actual stimulus in that lift. Technique isn't just how strict or how perfect and clean is that technique. It's how are you possibly going to get the most stimulus out of that lift. Technique encompasses a bunch of different things. I talked about it in a video recently. You should check that out if you haven't. It's important. It's very, very important. This is what actually stimulates growth. You can have everything else in check, but technique is one of those variables where if you don't have it down, you're probably not going to get that much growth. Go to my like power building example with the sumo deadlift, low bar squat, wider grip bench. This is an example of technique being a little bit wrong and screwing me out of a bunch of gains. So this is very important. Obviously, if you watch the channel, you know that. Next one I've got here is volume. And this is kind of the same thing where, I just drag you guys down again. All right. Oh, there's that machine row, by the way. I don't know, we kind of moved past that. But volume, this is another one of those things where if volume's not in check, you're leaving a lot of gains on the table. This is something where you can have perfect technique, you can have perfect exercise selection, but if you're not doing sufficient volume, you're probably not going to grow. And that's what's happened to me. I've done phases where my volume's been pretty low, and like I know how to train hard, very hard. When my volume's not high enough, I don't make gains. It's as simple as that. Next one I've got here, proximity to failure. I'm going to try not to drag you guys down. There you go. All right. Yeah, I don't think my mic is like long enough to actually make it when I'm drawing all the way up there. So proximity to failure, this is another variable. And I can say the same for all of these at the top. If your proximity to failure isn't sufficient enough to actually stimulate growth, you're probably not going to make many gains at all, especially once you're kind of in that like intermediate type phase. Once you've made all of your quote unquote noob gains, you're not going to get that much out of it if you don't have a sufficient proximity to failure. And it's up to you to decide what the proximity to failure is for that lift. There's no one size fits all approach to this. You have to know yourself, your program, your recovery, your own effort. It's stuff like this that, like, I could give you guys general advice that would just be watered down and maybe help everyone a tiny bit, but I'd rather talk about what I do and see if that resonates with you. So for myself, this is taking most lifts to 0 RIR or to failure or just past failure to advanced techniques, partials, cluster sets, mechanical drop sets. Those are all techniques that I use to build muscle. I had 2 variables left. 2 more things, and my phone ran out of storage, so I had to delete some stuff. That's so frustrating because when I have to edit a video and put 2 clips together, it takes hours to load. So that's frustrating, but we'll figure it out either way. So proximity to failure, just to finish up on my point there. If I don't put on muscle easily, I have to train hard. I'm not one of those guys that can get away with 2 or 1 reps in reserve. I have to brush right up against failure, if not 2 or past it. So the next one that I got, I already put it up here before it cut out. So this is going to be frequency. Frequency is one of the most underrated things when it comes to training for hypertrophy. And it's actually something that I should have talked about more in the past on this channel. And I have a video planned out in the future within the next month or so to actually touch on this a little bit more. I've done bro splits. I've done high frequency training muscle 4 times a week. Frequency is king. I've never grown off of bro splits. I even tried bro splits about a year and a half, 2 years ago at this point. I made 0 gains in 6 months off of it. It simply doesn't work for me. I think part of it is just going to be recovery. I think naturals, myself in particular, based on my experience, I recover easily, and then my muscle will also deteriorate easily. So if I train a muscle, it's ready to go pretty soon. And I think with my injuries, it's pretty obvious because I've never really had injuries, nagging pains or anything like that. So to me, it's clear that my recovery is great. But at the same time, with that quick recovery comes quick muscle deterioration. It's generally known that it takes about 2 weeks before your muscle actually starts to shrink back down. I think for myself, it's probably quicker than that. And when I'm not stacking in enough workouts in a shorter period of time, I really don't grow. Like, I legit didn't grow. I didn't change anything else aside from frequency. Even my volume was the same when I was doing these bro splits, and I didn't grow whatsoever. So that's not to say that it can't work for anybody, but I know for myself, it doesn't work. Frequency is key. That's something I have to touch on more on the channel because it is important. And the last one that I got here, this one is the only variable that isn't directly tied to programming, but it does have some involvement, and that's just going to be enjoyment. So I'm going to lean this forward so I don't pull you guys down with me. So enjoying your training and enjoying your program, I won't spend forever talking about this, but it is important. You have to look forward to the lifts that you're doing. I always like to have at least 1 or 2 lifts that are purely there for fun, even if they're not the most optimal. Because at the end of the day, the people that are the most successful, whether it's lifting, professional sports of any variation, or even anything that's not related to the physical, you enjoy it. The pros and the best of the best, yeah, they work hard, and yeah, they practice things that they don't want to, but they all enjoy what they're doing. So having a program that you're looking forward to doing the next day, or if you're at work and you're excited to go hit the gym, that stuff's going to be important. And there's no right or wrong with what you enjoy because it's all up to you. So for myself, there are things in my program that I enjoy. I like doing plat squats on those wedges. I love doing JM press where I get a brutal stretch on my triceps, which is my weakest muscle group. That's my glaring weakness that I've had my entire life. So being able to feel that sensation and being able to feel my triceps working, it's key. Even if I go a little overboard on volume for that muscle group just because I enjoy training it, even if I don't need that much volume, stuff like that can actually make a difference and make me enjoy my program a little bit more. The muscles that I want to train, I should be hitting them a little bit more often. Even if hitting it 4 times a week doesn't do anything more than twice a week, and these are just random numbers for the example, if I enjoy hitting that muscle, why not do it 4 times a week? Unless it drastically changes the program and like ruins everything, I think it's worth doing. And I think these things are worth looking into. So that's all I've got for the video today. Hope you guys enjoyed. And yeah, maybe I'll do more videos like this. We'll see.